Hello everyone, this is Ali MK Hindi and we're back for another video this week looking at PhD thesis writing and in particular bringing it all together. So you've done years worth of research work, you've conducted several studies or experiments. Now how do you bring these all under the PhD thesis in a manner where it's clear, logical and makes sense to the reader? And that in my estimation is the tricky part, because the PhD thesis is a couple of hundred pages. So how do you bring all that information together in a way where it's clear to the reader how everything is progressing and how it all answers your overall research question? So let's jump right to it. In my estimation, there are 5 key questions that you need to answer to make sure that your PhD thesis writing is structured in a way where it's logical and coherent and makes sense to the reader. Number 1, how does each study contribute to fulfilling your PhD aim or objectives? So when you've conducted those individual studies, you need to make it very clear to the reader how each one contributed to answering your overall aims and objectives. What I don't want to be as a reader doing is asking myself, okay, that's a good study or experiment, but I don't see how that's relevant to the overall PhD aim and objectives. So that to me is the first one that it's really important to answer. Number 2 is, how does each study establish the next study? So you need to make it clear that how study 2 paved the way for study 3 and etc. So for example, let's say you start off with the literature review and then you make it clear that we identified a gap in the literature, that there's no empirical research around the topic area. Therefore, we needed to conduct some qualitative research, let's say. So study 2 was qualitative. We found all these insightful findings, but we wanted to make findings more generalizable in a larger sample size. Hence, that led us to study 3, which was a quantitative study. You see where I'm going with this. You have to make it clear all throughout your thesis how each individual study established the next one. The next one is, what is the rationale behind the sequence? So why did you start, for example, with a literature review followed by an economic study followed by a qualitative study, or whatever the sequence is? Why did you start with qualitative work followed by quantitative work? You need to make it very clear to the reader what's the rationale behind this sequence, and you're not just sort of using a scattered gun approach and just doing whatever study feels right. The fourth one, and I think this one is really important, is when combining the findings of all these individual studies together, what are the overarching conclusions? So yes, you've done these individual studies, but when you bring them all under your thesis, and this is particularly in the discussion section, what are the overarching conclusions that emerge? So how are we tying all of these individual studies to reach one big conclusion? And last but not least, how did each study bring you closer to answering your research questions? So you started off with an overarching PhD research question, you had some aims and objectives. You need to make it very clear how each study brought you one step closer to answering the question right until the final study. So for example, we had this research question, we didn't know much about the literature, so we had to do a literature review. That then brought us closer because we identified a few gaps which framed our research questions. We then did a qualitative study to explore the topic further, but we still had 2 or other research objectives we needed to answer. So then we did a quantitative study followed by an observational study and so on. You get what I'm saying. So you have to make it really clear throughout the journey how each study was bringing you closer to answering your research question or questions. And these to me are really the 5 key questions you have to be asking yourself all throughout the PhD thesis writing process, and you have to make it very clear to the reader. Because if I'm asking myself these questions whilst reading a PhD thesis, then that shows that it's not logical, it's not clear to me how it's also being brought together. So really, in essence, you're really trying to show how is it all connected to answering your PhD question. All this years of research work and whatnot, how has it all of it combined to answer your PhD question? So that's it for my video this week. I hope you found it useful. If you did, like, comment, and do all the other amazing things we do on social media. And until next time, peace and love, everyone.